You ready, David? You ready? My pen's not working. There it is.
All the Wight County School Board's in session. Madam Clerk, you take the roll.
Mr. Colick?
Present.
Mr. Cunningham?
Present.
Mrs. Perkins?
Here.
Mr. Wooster?
Here.
And Mr. Marsh?
Here. Takes us to number 3, Mr. Brewster.
Mr. Chair, I move to approve the agenda for open session as presented.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, Madam Clerk.
Mr. Colick?
Yes.
Mr. Cunningham?
Yes.
Mrs. Perkins?
Yes.
Mr. Wooster?
Yes.
And Mr. Marsh?
Yes. Motion passes. Back to you, sir.
If everyone would, please stand for a moment of silence and the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Welcome, everybody. It is Thursday, January 16th, 2025, and this is the Wight County School Board Annual Organizational Meeting. And we'll just move right into it. Dr. Kramer, would you be so kind as to lead us through the first one?
Thank you, Chairman Marsh. The Code of Virginia calls for each local school board in the Commonwealth at its annual meeting to elect officers, and the Wight County School Board bylaws and rules of procedure require that the board holds its annual organizational meeting during the first meeting in January of each year. Upon election, the chair immediately assumes office and presides over the remainder of the meeting. Item 6.1 under reorganization is the election of the 2025 school board chair. Are there nominations for the office of chair for the school board?
Nominate Mark Wooster.
Is there a second? Okay, there's a nomination and a second. Are there any other nominations at this time?
I nominate Mr. Jason Marsh.
Is there a second? There's a second. Okay, nomination and a second. Are there any other nominations? Given that there are 2 nominations, we will take the vote in the order that the nominations were received, and the school board member with the majority vote will be the school board chair for 2025. Board Member Wooster was the first to be nominated. Therefore, we will take the vote for Board Member Wooster to be the 2025 chair. Madam Clerk, please take the vote for Board Member Wooster.
Mr. Colick?
No.
Mr. Cunningham?
No.
Mrs. Perkins?
Yes.
Mr. Wooster?
Yes.
And Mr. Marsh?
No.
Given that the motion failed, we will take the vote for the other nominee, Board Member Marsh, to be the 2025 chair. Madam Clerk, please take the vote for Board Member Marsh.
Mr. Colick?
Yes.
Mr. Cunningham?
Yes.
Mrs. Perkins?
No.
Mr. Wooster?
No.
And Mr. Marsh?
Yes.
With the majority of the votes, let the record show that Board Member Marsh was elected to be the 2025 school board chair. As stated earlier, per the Wight County School Board bylaws and rules of procedure, once the school board chair is elected, the chair immediately assumes office and presides over the remainder of the meeting. Congratulations to our school board chair for 2025, Chairman Jason Marsh.
Thank you. All right, we'll move right over to item 6.2, election of vice chair. Anyone want to nominate a board member for the vice chair position?
I would like to nominate Mrs. Brandy Perkins for the vice chair position.
Decline.
Okay. We have any other nominations for,
Nominate Mark Wooster for vice chair.
motion for Mr. Wooster?
I'll second that.
A second. Any discussion? Hearing none, Madam Clerk.
Mr. Colick,
Yes.
Mr. Cunningham,
Yes.
Mrs. Perkins,
Yes.
Mr. Wooster,
Yes.
and Mr. Marsh.
Yes. All right. Congratulations, Mr. Wooster, to the election of vice chair. All right. Nothing like getting a little awkward out of the way, huh? All right. Let's move over to 6.3. This is the appointment of the school board clerk. Someone like the motion? Make the motion for the clerk?
Mr. Chair, I move to appoint Ms. Jessica Whitlow as the school board clerk for 2025.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, Madam Clerk.
Mr. Colick,
Yes.
Mr. Cunningham,
Yes.
Mrs. Perkins,
Yes.
Mr. Wooster,
Yes.
and Mr. Marsh.
Yes. Congratulations, Mrs. Whitlow. Yeah, we look forward
Thank
to
you.
we look forward to more great things from you, ma'am. All right, 6.4, Deputy Clerk.
Mr. Chair, I move to appoint Ms. Casey Pulley as the school board deputy clerk for 2025.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, Madam Clerk.
Mr. Colick,
Yes.
Mr. Cunningham,
Yes.
Mrs. Perkins,
Yes.
Mr. Wooster,
Yes.
and Mr. Marsh.
Yes, motion passes. Congratulations, Mrs. Pulley. Okay, 7.1, another action item. This is the superintendent designees.
Mr. Chair, Superintendent, I would like to designate again Deputy Superintendent Getz and Deputy Superintendent Coleman as the superintendent designees.
Aye, sir. We get a motion for that so we can take action?
Mr. Chair, I move to support the superintendent's designees, Mrs. Susan Getz and Dr. Chris Coleman.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, Madam Clerk.
Mr. Colick,
Yes.
Mr. Cunningham,
Yes.
Mrs. Perkins,
Yes.
Mr. Wooster,
Yes.
and Mr. Marsh.
Yes, motion passes. Congratulations to the both. All right, 7.2, these are the 2025 school board meeting dates.
Mr. Chair, I move to approve the 2024 regular school board meeting dates as presented.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
There is one that I will not be able to attend, but I don't see that that should necessitate moving it for everybody else,
Okay.
so.
As time marches on, I'm sure we can look at changing it if we need to. All right, we have a motion and a second. Madam Clerk?
Mr. Colick,
Yes.
Mr. Cunningham,
Yes.
Mrs. Perkins,
Yes.
Mr. Wooster,
Yes.
and Mr. Marsh.
Yes, motion passes. And Madam Clerk, we'll get that posted on the website sometime soon.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. 7.3, School Board Code of Conduct.
Mr. Chair, I move to approve the code of conduct as presented.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, Madam Clerk.
Mr. Colick,
Yes.
Mr. Cunningham,
Yes.
Mrs. Perkins,
Yes.
Mr. Wooster,
Yes.
and Mr. Marsh.
Yes, motion passes. And again, Madam Clerk, we'll be hanging that on the website in an appropriate location?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Moving right along, we're going to get into our committee assignments. First one is our, where are we at here? Finance Committee. Finance Committee, that's item 7.4. I understand that Mr. Colick and Mrs. Perkins are interested in assuming the Finance Committee positions. Is there any preference as to primary or secondary, or does it even matter?
Doesn't matter.
Okay. Make a motion? I'll make the motion. Board, I move to assign Mr. Colick and Mrs. Perkins as the Finance Committee members for Wight County School Board.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any comments? I say good luck. It's a lot of work. All right. Madam Clerk?
Mr. Colick,
Yes.
Mr. Cunningham,
Yes.
Mrs. Perkins,
Yes.
Mr. Wooster,
Yes.
and Mr. Marsh.
Yes. All right. Policy Committee. I understand that for Policy Committee, we have 3 interested board members. That's Mrs. Perkins, Mr. Wooster, and Mr. Colick.
I don't mind dropping off if they want it.
Well, I've got a question for our attorney. Would there be any prohibition of having 3 members on the committee?
There's no prohibition on that.
Okay. I think having 3 members on the committee would actually be really good.
Any issues with that?
The one thing is I'll just tell Madam Clerk for these committees that are being appointed, SEAC, Finance, Policy Committees, just make sure you advertise them and make them meetings as you would a regular, as you would under FOIA.
Yeah, and we've been doing that with the Policy Committee. So.
And in fact, just for clarification, so because we're a 5-member board and we have a Policy Committee with 3 members, that would technically constitute a quorum. How do we mitigate that?
If I think the way to mitigate that would assign very clearly the purpose of the Policy Committee. So, for example, the board, as part of its vote, or after the vote, you can say, any committees of the board is limited to making the recommendation to the board as opposed to, voting on any particular policy. And I think that's certainly fine to put those guardrails in for all the committees.
Would the board agree that our current bylaws set those boundaries already?
Well, I think they do, because if we're going to have a board meeting, we've got to post that so many days in advance anyway. So it's not like a committee with 3 members can usurp the board. So I think everything we have in place is good, and we'll just, exactly like Pac said, when it's time to advertise it, we advertise it specifically for the committee.
Okay, I agree. Any other thoughts on that? Somebody want to make a motion for that?
Mr. Chair, I move that the Policy Committee contain Ms. Brandy Perkins, Mr. John Colick, and myself, Mr. Mark Wooster.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any other comments, Madam Clerk?
Mr. Colick,
Yes.
Mr. Cunningham,
Yes.
Mrs. Perkins,
Yes.
Mr. Wooster,
Yes.
and Mr. Marsh.
Yes. Congratulations to our Policy Committee members. 7.6 is CTE Advisory Committee. And again, I believe we have 3 interested board members. I've got Mrs. Perkins, Mr. Wooster, and Mr. Cunningham. Any comments or discussions on that one?
Traditionally, that's been 2 members, but I think, like we said with the Policy Committee, I see no harm in having 3 members.
I would agree. Board participation is certainly always encouraged.
Absolutely.
Okay. I'm looking at the names here, so I'll move that we appoint Mrs. Perkins, Mr. Wooster, and Mr. Cunningham as our CTE Advisory Committee.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, Madam Clerk?
Mr. Colick,
Yes.
Mr. Cunningham,
Yes.
Mrs. Perkins,
Yes.
Mr. Wooster,
Yes.
and Mr. Marsh.
Yes. Congratulations. All right. Moving down the line, 7.7 is the WHRO Board of Directors and an alternate. I have on a list of interested board members myself and Mr. Cunningham. Anyone else? Any comments on that? No. Someone like to make a motion?
Mr. Chair, I move that Mr. Cunningham and Mr. Marsh be on the WHRO Board of Directors.
Second.
Second. Board of Directors.
We have a motion in 2 seconds.
Okay.
You're important.
Any other comments? Madam Clerk?
Would there be a primary and a secondary for that? Because I know with this committee specifically.
Yeah, you would need one.
Want to flip for it?
No, you can be the primary. I'm good
Okay,
with that.
I'll take it.
Should we amend the motion, or is that good the way it is?
Oh, we have a motion and a second on the table. I move to amend the last motion with appointing myself as the primary and Mr. Cunningham as the secondary for the WHRO Board of Directors.
Second.
Motion and a second. Madam Clerk?
Mr. Colick,
Yes.
Mr. Cunningham,
Yes.
Mrs. Perkins,
Yes.
Mr. Wooster,
Yes.
and Mr. Marsh.
Yes. All right, we're almost there, folks. 7.8 is the CSEP Joint Board and the Governor's School for the Arts. And again, this is it's not specifically a primary and a secondary. I don't know that it needs to be.
Typically it
That
is.
one does
It is?
need to be,
Yeah.
yeah.
It does? Okay. So I've got myself and Mr. Colick. I don't necessarily need to be primary if you want it, sir, or I can, whatever.
I can take the primary. It's probably easier if I do, since you do, work during the day and these meetings are at noon.
Okay. All right. Then I would move to appoint Mr. Colick as the primary and myself as the secondary for the CSEP Joint Board and Governor's School for the Arts.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Madam Clerk?
Mr. Colick,
Yes.
Mr. Cunningham,
Yes.
Mrs. Perkins,
Yes.
Mr. Wooster,
Yes.
and Mr. Marsh.
Yes. Okay, last but not least is the Special Education Advisory Committee. Mr. Brewster, I've got you down as interested in being primary and myself as secondary. You good with that? Or is there anyone else who's got interest in that? Doesn't matter. Okay. I intend to show up. I know we had one last night.
That one doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter? Okay. Doesn't need to be a primary, secondary?
I don't think.
Okay, we'll just keep it straight. I need to get myself educated on that, so that's why. All right, and then I would move to appoint Mr. Wooster and myself to the Special Education Advisory Committee.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none.
Mr. Colick,
Yes.
Mr. Cunningham,
Yes.
Mrs. Perkins,
Yes.
Mr. Wooster,
Yes.
and Mr. Marsh.
Yes, motion passes. Okay, that takes us to board member comments. Anybody want anything they want to say?
Sure. This is the third time I've done this, or fourth time. I kind of lost count. going into my final year on the board, and this is probably the smoothest that we've ever had. So, you know, those of you that will be on the board next year, let's just keep moving forward, so we have less contention on the board even in future years. This, you know, I can't say enough about how smoothly this went tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else? I'll just say that, I mean, obviously anyone who's watching knows that we had some differences of opinion for the chair appointment. Certainly hope there's no hard feelings. I said it in December at our last meeting for the year, and I'll say it again tonight. This school division has overcome some pretty big obstacles, and we've made some very positive changes in the past couple of years. And I look forward to being a part of that as we continue to do great stuff. So, on that, we will adjourn and get ready for our next meeting.